Good afternoon. Many of you know me. I'm Stephanie Ramsey. I'm one of the nurse practitioners at the Cleveland County Health Department Main Clinic. I recently received my doctorate in nursing practice from Gardner-Webb University, and my project was on the human papillomavirus. I'm very passionate about it. I presented this information to our nurses and our providers within the health department, and me and Tiffany and Deshay and Heather had discussed getting it in a format for school health nurses and providers because we thought that it would be good information for you as well to have and to share with your patients in your clinics. Okay, so what is the human papillomavirus? The CDC says the human papillomavirus is the most common sexually transmitted infection in the United States. You can see it affects almost 79 million people in the U.S., 14 million new infections a year between those aged 15 to 59. And then for a lot of our population, we think about 7 million new infections between the ages of 15 to 24. Okay, I think that's the age group that we can make a huge impact on. Okay, the initial infection occurs through microabrasions on the epithelium, so therefore it allows the HPV particle into the cells at the basal layer of the skin. Okay, so CDC reports 80% of women and 90% of men who are sexually active will acquire at least one strand of the HPV virus sometime in their lifetime. Okay, routes of transmission include skin to skin, skin to mucosa, but they do say sexual transmission through some type of sexual intercourse or sexual habits is the most common. Studies have found that there's other means other than sex, such as horizontal transmission, self-inoculation, vertical transmission, and waterborne transmission. Okay, not saying this to scare any of you, but we're going to think about those ways. So horizontal transmission includes transmission from fomites, so like objects, fingers, mouth, skin contact, other than sexual skin contact. Okay, GYN equipment like a pelvic ultrasound, vaginal probe, was found to have HPV DNA present after proper disinfectant in 21% of the time in one study, and the probes were covered with condoms. Okay, so we've got to think about how that happens. Well, if it's not, the probe's not completely covered and they've got the HPV virus on their leg, if you've been in there doing a vaginal ultrasound or assisted with that vaginal ultrasound before, you can see how the probe could get contaminated. Studies have also shown high levels of HPV DNA under fingernails and in undergarments after disinfection was performed. Okay, HPV 16, which is one of the high risk, was found to retain 30% of its infectivity after 7 days at room temperature on an object. So that's pretty scary if you think about it, because we think about an object could be a doorknob, doesn't have to be a vaginal probe. Okay, so but remember, you've got to have that microabrasion for it to get into your system. Self-inoculation transmission can be achieved through touching an object or another person and then touching yourself. Again, somebody's touched themselves, they have HPV, then they touch a doorknob, you've got a microabrasion on your hand, you touch that doorknob, and then that's one way that you could be infected. Okay, a study in 2016 found that 51.1% of virgins, self-reported virgins, in a colposcopy clinic were positive for high-risk HPV. So how did they get that? That could have been through this type of transmission. It was not able to be determined if it was through self-inoculation or through an object, but one could easily see how it could be self-inoculation. Okay, vertical transmission can be from mother to newborn. This can happen through amniotic fluid, the placenta, by contact through the mother's genitalia as the infant is exiting the birth canal in a natural birth. There is a condition called juvenile onset recurrent respiratory papillomatosis, which is a condition that's caused by the HPV 6 and 11. that starts causing complications in the child around the age 2 to 5. And what happens is multiple papillomas form rapidly in the child's respiratory tract that require repeated surgeries to clear the airway. Okay, approximately 820 cases of this occur per year, and a 20-year study performed in Denmark showed that women with warts have a 200-fold risk of passing this to their children through natural childbirth. When we're talking about warts, we're talking about those genital warts. Okay, another form of transmission we talked about was waterborne transmission. It's never been proven that you can catch it that way, but HPV DNA has been identified in water habitats such as pools, rivers, and untreated sewage. The hypothesis for this waterborne transmission started in 2011 when it was found that the HPV remains infectious for 7 days on a wet surface. So that's where the waterborne transmission started. HPV has over 150 different strands. Certain strands cause certain problems. Strands 6 and 11 are low risk for cervical cancer, but contribute to 90% of genital warts for our patients. Strands 16 and 18 are highest risk for cervical cancer, contributing to 70% of all cervical cancers, just those two strands. And so a lot of PAPs check specifically, they genotype out for 16 and 18. It is a more expensive test, so not all places do that. Strands 16, 18, 31, 33, 45, 52, and 58 are high risk for vulvar, vaginal, penile, anal, and oropharyngeal cancers. Unfortunately, HPV has been found to be resistant against multiple disinfectants, including alcohol-based disinfectants such as ethanol and isopropanol. These alcohols are the two most common alcohols used in hospital hand sanitizers. Since resistant to common hospital-grade disinfectants are common, it makes the virus available to be transferred via objects or surfaces. You could very easily see how that's happened. Somebody orders a vaginal ultrasound probe to be done in the hospital. Say for some reason the tech doesn't get that cleaned as well, or doesn't put it in the device that they now have to clean them, immediately sets it on the counter, then doesn't get the counter disinfected properly. So you can see easily how the transmission can occur. HPV is sensitive to hypochlorite and peracetic acid silver-based disinfectants. So in a lot of larger practices, those are available. They are more expensive. Most HPVs are asymptomatic and resolve spontaneously in 6 to 24 months. That's part of the reason why Pap smear guidelines changed. You used to have to get a Pap smear every year. Now, depending on if you had HPV, you didn't have HPV, if you had atypical cells. That's why those guidelines changed, because they realized that the body may take care of some of this on its own. Warts usually develop in 6 to 10 months after initial infection. The process for cancer development from HPV infection takes 5 to 10 years minimum from what the research shows, and 20 to 25 years on average. So when we're talking, that's why we're saying we need to get this now to prevent cancer later on. You don't need to wait until later on. Cervical and oropharyngeal HPV cancers are reported at higher rates in tobacco users than non-tobacco users, so that's something I tell my patients. If they're a smoker, let's get the HPV vaccination. It's another tidbit that I can give them to kind of help encourage them from getting that type of cancer. The stages of HPV cancer are HPV acquisition, HPV persistence versus clearance, because remember, sometimes the body can clear it, progression to precancerous lesions. Hopefully, if it's cervical precancerous lesions, we can catch those before it becomes invasive cervical cancer, i.e. why we do the PAPs. HPV causes 90% of all anal cancers, 65% of all vaginal cancers, 50% of vulvar cancers, and up to 90% of oropharyngeal cancers. So can cause a lot of cancers. All right, help survive. We've got the HPV vaccination. Okay, it doesn't matter how a person identifies, they can receive the vaccination. It's been approved for males and females. As long as they were born, then they're eligible to get the vaccination. And the vaccination is the Gardasil 9. And it's made from tiny proteins that look like the outside of a real HPV cell. However, the vaccine does not contain any live virus, killed virus, or DNA from the virus. So it cannot cause cancer. It cannot cause other HPV-related illnesses. I have that question asked to me a lot of times by parents. And no, we are not injecting them with HPV. And the vaccine works by stimulating the immune system to produce antibodies that fight HPV. Okay? The HPV vaccine also contains ingredients that help stimulate the immune system and keeps the vaccine stable and makes it suitable for injection. It does contain aluminum, sodium chloride, which is salt, water, L-histidine, polysorbate 80, and borax. You have some patients say, well, I don't know that I want my child to get a vaccine that contains aluminum. Well, you can tell them their child's already got vaccines that contain aluminum. Okay? More than 98% of recipients develop an antibody response to HPV types included in their respective vaccine 1 month after completing a full vaccination series. So that means 1 month after completing the series, they have antibodies developed to 6, 11, 16, 18, 31, 33, 45, 52, and 58. So that's great because we're preventing them as long as they complete their series. So a study in 2021 found that cervical cancer rates were reduced almost by 90% in women in their 20s in England who were offered the vaccines starting at age 12 to 13. And that's why I tell parents it's great to start early so that we get that prevention before they become sexually active. Again, I stress that it's not something that is just only sexually transmitted, but it can be sexually transmitted. So yay, I say we need to shout it from the rooftops. Okay, we've got a vaccine that prevents cancer, the big C. In the U.S., 4,000 deaths occur annually due to cervical cancer, and more than 12,000 are diagnosed annually. There have been reported cases of GYN surgeons who perform LEEP procedures with HPV positive oropharyngeal squamous cell carcinoma. This has happened due to the vaporization of the LEEP procedures. That's why proper fumigation hoods must be used in LEEP procedures. And unfortunately, this is one of the ways we found this out because people have developed problems from things that they were doing that we didn't know all we needed to know about HPV. So we need to change our conversation and present Gardasil as a vaccine that prevents cancer, not a vaccine that prevents an STD. That's the biggest takeaway, is we need to change how we're presenting things. Drum roll for how we're doing. All right, so the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, through their Healthy People 2030 Goal Initiative, says that the U.S. has a goal of 80% of eligible adolescents aged 13 to 15 will be fully vaccinated against HPV by 2030 to help prevent the HPV infections, which in essence will help prevent HPV-associated cancers. So how are we doing? Well, North Carolina, we are at 67.8% of those 13 to 17 years old. And I know there's a difference between 13 to 15 and 13 to 17, but sometimes that's just how one place has a goal and then another place, a state tracks it a different way. Okay. In Cleveland County, only 40.6% of those 13 to 17-year-olds have vaccination series completion. I realize this data is from 2023. Unfortunately, right now I'm not able to get with a consultant. Holly Kill is no longer with the state, so I don't have the most up-to-date information for that, but still I do know we're still not where we need to be. All right, so when we're thinking about where we're at as far as HPV vaccination, we look at the vaccinations that are due to a child at that same time. Okay, so when we're looking at Tdap and men ACWI, Cleveland County Health Department is at 99%. Okay, so we're doing great with that, probably because it's a mandated immunization for school, and I'm sure y'all are very well aware of that because you're the ones that's having to say, you can't come back because you're not up to date with your immunizations and there's no exemption for you. Okay. So where were we at when I started looking at this for the health department? When I started looking at this, very originally we were at 7%, and then we got up to 10% by the end of age 13 had completed their HPV vaccinations. We are much better than this now, but that's originally where we were. I think some of this has to do with our interactions, and our interactions matter. Nurses are one of the most trusted professions, so they're looking to us for guidance. So how do we present the HPV vaccination? It's required that you get meningococcal ACWI and Tdap today. HPV is recommended but not required by the state. Okay, so why do we do this? We're in a hurry, we're short-staffed. We don't feel comfortable talking about the vaccines, or we don't want to talk about the vaccines' personal preference. But with HPV, I hope I've given you enough information that you see the importance of that. So let's change our conversations around the HPV vaccination. And I want that conversation to be, it's a vaccine that prevents cancer. It is cancer prevention. It is the only thing we have really that is true cancer prevention. Yeah, you cannot smoke and you're hopefully preventing cancer, but we know that if you acquire the HPV strands 16 and 18, that you may have a problem with cervical cancer later on, because we know those are linked to cervical cancer.
I don't think we should talk about this. Come on, people might misunderstand what we're trying to say,
All right, so I use that because, we're not talking about sex, but we are wanting to talk about something that parents often associate with sex, and I just want us to try to get away with that, okay? I listed at an age 9 to 10 office visit, or if a parent comes by to see you in like open house, since it's school health, or if it's one of the clinics where we're doing on Saturday and we're talking about vaccinations, how can you answer questions about the HPV vaccination? And so I gave you a little snippet of what you can say. I recommend starting HPV vaccination today to ensure the best prevention or protection for Sammy. Starting the HPV series today will produce a strong immune response and reduce the number of vaccines, because remember, if they get it when they're younger, there's only 2 versus 3. Who doesn't love less shots? Sammy will get his first HPV vaccination today, and Sammy will come back for his second and last dose in 6 to 12 months. We'll schedule that follow-up appointment before you leave. And I always close with, do either of you have any questions before we give the vaccine? Because you want to include the kid, because I want the child to feel confident in making this decision and understanding too. Okay, so Mom has questions. Don't sweat it. You know your stuff. You've researched it. You know it. You've learned it. Be confident, concise, consistent with your message. Does Sammy really need it now? Sammy's only 9. The HPV vaccination is recommended now by the American Academy of Pediatrics and can be given as early as age 9. Plus, if we start Sammy now with the first dose, Sammy will only need 1 additional dose to complete the series. The vaccine works best before someone is exposed to the virus, which is why we start at age 9. We put on a seatbelt before we're in an accident, don't we? It's one of the things you can say, because it's a form of prevention from an accident occurring, i.e. coming in contact with HPV. But Sammy's not sexually active, so don't you think we can skip it today? Mom's she's just really not sure about that. Again, the vaccine works best before someone is exposed to the virus. Younger adolescents have a stronger protection response to the vaccine than older adolescents, which is why we start giving it at age 9. Okay, Another thing she may say, Sammy doesn't need that vaccine, does he? I thought HPV only affected girls. Actually, males also get HPV-related cancers. About 40% of cancers caused by HPV occur in males, okay? And I think this originally occurred because, remember, it was presented as a girls' vaccine to prevent cervical cancer. Yes, it does help girls prevent cervical cancer, but also we're seeing more anal, penile, and oropharyngeal cancers now, and so they're realizing the importance in the males and the females. All right, so you didn't get Sammy at age 9 or 10. Mom couldn't come with Sammy this time. Sammy's coming in with Dad. Okay, so we're going to talk about HPV again. So we're going to present it a little bit different. Today, Sammy is due for Tdap, HPV, and meningitis vaccine. We just threw it in the center. The vaccines are important because they protect Sammy from serious illnesses that could make him very sick. Sammy will get one Tdap, one meningitis, and his first dose of HPV today. We will have Sammy come back for a second and final dose of HPV in 6 to 12 months. We'll schedule that follow-up appointment before you two leave, or you can say we can refer you to the health department before you two leave if you're doing it on a Saturday clinic. Do either of you have any questions before we give the vaccines? And I always say, I always talk to the child as well, because, at this age, they're starting to think about their own health sometimes and think about, body image and long-term things. So it's a good idea to include them in the conversation. So Dad says, okay, is it safe for Sammy to get 3 vaccines at the same time? Confident, concise, consistent, you know your stuff, you've researched it, you know how to answer these questions. You can say, yes, these vaccines have been studied together to make sure they're safe when given at the same time. Millions of adolescents have received these vaccines together. Yes, I routinely recommend and administer these vaccines to adolescent Sammy's age all the time, every day, because that's true, that's what we do. Yes, remember when Sammy was a baby, Sammy routinely received multiple vaccines at the same time? This situation's the exact same, no different. Okay? Gardasil has been studied with men ACWI and Tdap and has data to show its safety when given with men ACWI and Tdap, so you can give them that information, and that may actually calm their nerves a little bit more, knowing that it has been studied with those specific vaccinations. All right, so there's a lot of questions surrounding the HPV vaccination. So is the vaccination safe? You can assure them, yes, the vaccination has been studied and is safe. You might have some soreness or redness in your arm where you received the vaccine, and in some cases you may have a fever a day or two after receiving the vaccine, but that's just your body working to build antibodies. Will I feel sick afterwards? Well, you won't get sick from the vaccine, but some teens sometimes feel lightheaded. So we just want you to sit here and rest for 15 minutes afterwards. Rarely there can be some side effects, but it's much safer to get vaccinated than to not get vaccinated, because we don't want you developing any form of cancer. I'm really confused about what I see online about vaccines. How do I know what to believe? That's a popular question. There's a lot of misinformation about vaccines online and in the media. It's important to look for reliable resources that are consistent and verifiable with their information. I make my recommendation to you based off the most current guidance from medical experts, and make sure you know that you're telling this from the American Pediatric Society and the American Cancer Society as well. It is okay to recommend non-governmental sites like cancer.org and the American Cancer Society, HPV.org, just because you want to not always say, oh, the CDC says this or the CDC says that. If you can give them some other non-governmental sites, a lot of patients like that better. Again, this is another one that I receive from parents all the time. Which vaccines are required for school? I think I only want to get those today for Sammy. So I always say, while there may be some of the vaccines required for school entry, I suggest, based on recommendations from the medical experts, not a school board, the medical experts, And what is best for Sammy's health is that Sammy receive the first dose of the HPV vaccination today to provide him with the best protection. Just because some vaccines are not required for school does not mean they are not as important in keeping Sammy healthy. We are most interested in protecting Sammy as best we can, and we're not only focused on vaccines that are required for the school. And I stress that to them because the state school board says, well, this is what's required. That's not what the best recommendation is from the medical experts. Again, same scenario, different age. Sammy's now 11, 12. Again, we want to stress that we want Sammy to get his vaccinations based off evidence from the medical experts and what's best for Sammy's health. Okay, we want Sammy to get Tdap, HPV, and meningitis vaccine because that's what's going to provide him his best protection at this age. Just because they're not required by the school doesn't mean they're not needed for Sammy's health. We're interested in protecting all of Sammy, just not certain aspects of Sammy. So these vaccines can include several serious diseases, including the whooping cough, HPV-related cancers, and meningitis. Hopefully when you present it that way, they'll understand that HPV-related cancers is just as important as meningitis or the whooping cough, I hope. And so we want Sammy to get all three of these vaccinations, not just what the North Carolina school board says he needs to get. Although we all agree those are important and needed, but we want to include HPV with that if at all possible. I've also got the why does Sammy need the HPV vaccination? Sammy's not going to be with those kind of people that contract STDs. And I'm like, well, we never know who we're going to wind up with in life or what path our child's going to go down. I hope you're right, but I would like to help you protect Sammy, just in case he makes a bad decision one time. Okay. The HPV virus is important because it's going to protect Sammy against cancer and genital warts. HPV-related cancers and genital warts can affect both boys and girls, so it doesn't matter if Sammy's a boy or girl, okay? The cancers prevented by this vaccine typically don't develop until years after the initial exposure of the virus, so we don't know who will or who will not go on to develop the cancers, so it's better for us to protect Sammy now. Okay, we know HPV causes greater than 37,000 cancers in the U.S. every year, and most could be prevented with the vaccine. Plus, you can't screen for a lot of these cancers. We're not screening for oropharyngeal cancers in most places. Some dentist offices are, and that's great, but a lot are not. We're not screening for an anal HPV cancer. We're not really screening for, a penile cancer, a vulvar cancer. We are screening for cervical, thank goodness. All right, another thing, I heard some bad news about the HPV vaccine online and don't really want my child to get it. All right, how do you approach that? You just simply, I understand your concern. There's been some misinformation in the media online about vaccines. Over 135 million doses have been given in the U.S. and no serious safety concerns have been found. I'm confident in the science and research behind the vaccine. The vaccine's been effective and used for more than 15 years. I have absolutely no concerns about giving this vaccine to children at this practice. Okay, you can say, are the nurse practitioners and PAs at the Cleveland County Health Department recommend it to all their patients? Because we do. We believe in this vaccine. We see the problems through our family planning clinic and our STD clinic from patients who have not gotten the vaccine. I just this week gave the HPV vaccine to a homosexual male who's 35 years old because he's like, you know what, if I've not been in contact with somebody, I may come in contact with somebody. And I just had a friend who had anal cancer associated with HPV. So we're seeing the detriments of those people who are affected by it. So if we can get people to get it now, we're going to prevent a lot of cancers, and that's what's really important. All right, I stress so much these frequently asked questions and how to answer them because I hear them a lot. So I'm worried the HPV vaccine will open the door to behaviors like giving Sammy permission to have sex. Okay. The way I answer that is I understand your concern, but studies have found that getting the vaccine did not make kids more likely to start having intimate relationships. Or I can see why you might think that, but we learn to wear a helmet when we ride a bike in case we fall, and to wear a seatbelt in case we're in a car accident. Same thing, we get vaccines in case we're exposed to a lethal illness. And remember, we can be exposed to this through the means other than sexual contact. If we have a sore on our hand, okay, and we have that microabrasion so the HPV DNA can enter through our hand, if somebody has the HPV virus on their hand, they touched a doorknob, remember it can stay on the surface for 7 days at room temperature, we have that sore on our hand, we open up the doorknob, then we've got the potential to contract the HPV virus. Okay, that it can happen like that. Transmission can be that simple. All right, so could the HPV vaccine hurt her fertility? No, the HPV vaccine has not been found to cause reproductive problems in women who've received the vaccine. So that has been debunked. It has not been found to be true. All right. Multiple studies have shown that patients and parents value what healthcare personnel tell them about the HPV vaccination and had positive vaccine uptake after those interactions. We as nurses, PAs, healthcare personnel matter to our patients. They trust us, okay? So give them the appropriate information to make the best decision for their health care. Take the time to answer their questions and address their concerns about the vaccine. You know, if they're worried about aluminum, let them know that the other vaccines they get have aluminum in them as well, and that it's not been shown to cause any problems. Tailor the discussion based on the patient age and talk to both the child and the parent. Because a lot of times the child will, I've had actually, teenagers come in 16, 17, and they're like, well, my mom didn't want me to have that vaccine, but I feel like I need it because I know I've already been with 2 or 3 people. I mean, I've had teenagers tell me that. So use the opportunity when the child's in front of you to answer their questions too. I mean, I had a 22-year-old that I had to tell her she had HPV on her pap smear. She was absolutely devastated, and she was like, I wish my mom would have got me the vaccine, but she wouldn't when I was younger. And then I didn't think about it after I went off to college. And then she was just completely devastated. And I gave her reassurance, and, we went ahead and started the vaccine at that time because just because she had one of the strands of HPV doesn't mean that she had all the strands of HPV that we consider high risk. So giving her that vaccine at 22 years old, I may be helping her prevent against some other strand. She may have had, 45 and not 16 and 18. So that way she's getting some protection. All right. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. These are the references that were contained in the slides. I'm also going to send some just cheat sheets. I'll send a copy of my PowerPoint as well. If you want that, you can have that. I don't mind sharing information. I'm very passionate about HPV. I went to the state and talked about it at the state level. It is something that I feel we need to focus more on. We don't because it's not required, but I'm hoping through this education that you learn how important it is to talk to parents and the child about preventing HPV-related cancers. Thank you for your time.